Hey everybody, I'm back for part 2 on making this traveler's notebook. Last night after I sewed it together, I folded my traveler's notebook in half and I clipped it together. And so I have these little gouges in there, which will probably clear up or come out of there, I hope. I just was trying to get it bent into shape overnight and forgot to take that off. But anyway, since this is a demo one, if that doesn't go away, it's not the end of the world. I'll disguise it with a little pocket decor item. Okay, so our next thing is to, excuse me, again, it's the allergy season here and it's just driving me nuts. The next thing we want to do is add our holes to the TN cover so that we can put in our elastic. But we will paint it before we put in the elastic. So fold your TN cover in half so you can get a good center area. You could mark it inside with a pencil or a pen, which I think I'm going to do right now. I have that nice crease there, but I want to just sort of get a center line that will be a little easier to distinguish. And this can be painted too when we're done, the inside, or it can be left alone. Just your preference on that. Kind of like the lighter color in a way. Okay, so here's the center line. And what we need to do is have a item to puncture. If you have a nail or maybe a thicker thumbtack, that could work. I do have a couple awls that I ordered in a set. I'm going to grab one of those. Here's like what I have. I had a thicker one that I got out of my husband's toolbox, but this is better for the journaling, I think, because they're a smaller, would that be diameter or circumference? Anyway, can't think right now. Okay, so our first thing to do is on each end, we want to come down a fourth of an inch. I measured this last night. Let me double check my notes. I have another page somewhere. Here we go. Okay. Basically, from here to here is going to be about a ½ inch. So we're going to do a puncture at the beginning, a puncture at the fourth, or at the, the 4th inch, and then another puncture at the end of the ½ inch measure. So a ½ inch going across, puncture, 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 and when I measured my TN last night, it came down about 1/4 of an inch. So what I just want to do here, this is a Tim Holtz ruler. I ordered it online, but I like it because it's see-through. So it helps you line up your item that you're working with. Okay, so I'm going to do okay, so you can puncture it or you can mark it with inks. Let's mark it first. Puncture there, and then I'm going to come over a 1/4, and then I'm going to come over a 1/4. And you just poke your pen down in there. This material is really soft. Okay? And you see how that looks. We have the here to here. It's about a ½ inch. Oh, no, it's not. Yes, it is. Let's see. And then we're doing a 1/4 of an inch from each side, and then we're coming down about a 1/4 inch for all 3 of those. Then down here, I would say it might be easier just to go ahead and mark it, and then you can just do all the steps at once, and you can do all the puncturing at once. So come up a 1/4 inch. Whoops. Do a little marking, a little circular marking with your pen. Come over a 1/4, and come over a 1/4. Okay, so we have 3 holes there, 3 holes there. that is going to do this for us. Let me point with the pen. 1, 2, 3 holes. 1, 2, 3 holes. Then we're going to do the center one. I kind of wrote down here, puncture at the beginning, puncture fourth, puncture fourth. Each set of holes is about a 1/4 inch from the top or the bottom of your Traveler's Notebook cover. So we do the top of the spine and the bottom of the spine, and then we want to do the center hole for the closure about 8.5 inches down from the first grouping of punctures. So let me show you on mine. I don't know why I said 8.5. It's 4.5. So from the top of the TN to the closure hole is about 4.5. It looks, well, you know, it would depend slightly on the variation of what kind of measuring thing you're using. But yeah, it's almost 4.5. So I'm just going to do 4.5, not 8.5. If you happen to glance at that, that's 4.5. Measure 4.5 inches down from the top, and do a little pen mark there as well. Or eyeball it and just do it about halfway, or fold your TN in half a little bit. Not too hard so you don't get a big crease in there. But that will be the marking for the closure hole, which sounds funny. How can it be both those things? But this is the hole that we puncture to put in our elastic to hold our TN shut. And I'm just gonna kind of gouge that. Another thing you can do is put a hole in the center of the back cover, because I don't know if the Traveler's Notebook brand or the Midori brand, the original one, has it still, but they had the hole punctured in the back and then the elastic would come around to the front. Some people have said that's not a good setup, because when you're writing, then you have that lump. My nose is so tickly from these allergies. Anyway, so I prefer it in the spine anyway. It doesn't seem like it gets in the way there at all. One thing you need to be thinking about too is if you have any kind of elastic on hand. I have this thicker elastic that I ordered from Etsy from Lucky Little Planner, but there's numerous shops that sell it. It's a rare commodity now, elastic, especially that 1/4 inch elastic, because people are using it to sew masks. But hopefully the crafting elastic is still available. This is elastic cord. It's much thinner. I got that at Joann's. And then I just got some string out for measuring purposes. This is probably what I'll string the inside with. And I'll use the thicker, perhaps, for the closure. In this TN, I want to show you, this is Start Bay. That's a maker in the UK. See, the center elastic is much thinner, and when I first got that, I wasn't sure if I was going to like that, or if it was going to be sturdy enough to hold the TNs in, but I haven't had any problem with it at all, and it probably is a little less bulky. And then you can see they use the thicker elastic for the closure. I think it would be really neat to have a Traveler's Notebook that had that 1/4 inch elastic as the closure. I mean, I've only seen white or black. If it could come in other colors, I would kind of like a thicker elastic, because I feel like it would just hold it more securely. I haven't seen that anywhere. But you can also do a double strand of center closure elastic. Okay, so here we go. I've done this on the inside, so I have fewer ink marks on the outside, which may not be an issue once I go to painting it. I'm going to try to get to about the center of this big catalog I have. And I'm going to take my awl, or if you have a big pin or like a yarn needle, something a little wider, even an old pen that you don't care about, you could probably poke it through with that. So I'm going to start with my center hole, and I just push down until I feel it go into the binding of the book. And I'm going to do the other center one. My line got a little bit off, but I can see where the center fold is. And now I'm going to do a center hole in the spine where the closure elastic will be inserted. And that might be helpful to wiggle that a little and just enlarge that hole slightly. Okay, now I'm going to do each of the side punctures. There we go. That worked out well. I try to do it over the opening, like where the, I don't know what you call that, but where the pages come together, because it can go deeper and you can, I don't know. It just helps you line it up, I think. I like that a little bit better right in the center of the book. And here, this is a really good way to poke holes into your papers if you're making your own inserts too. Because this just kind of serves as a guide. If you can line up your center spot, you know, it just kind of sinks in there, and it's a good way to get a nice deep puncture for later sewing. This is where we're going to put the elastics. These top and bottom ones are for our elastics. If you don't have elastic right now, you could use embroidery floss, maybe a finer yarn. I mean, it doesn't have the stretch to it, but if you don't have all the supplies you need, you can still press ahead with this and string it through, get a feel for it, and you can still put some inserts in there if you keep it loose enough to maneuver them into the underneath the threads. Okay, so now we have where our whole where our elastics are going to go. I'm going to just go over it a little bit more from this side, so when I get to threading it, it's not going to be a big deal. You can even hold it up at this point and just get your awl in there, or your needle or whatever. Once you have the hole made, if you don't have an awl, just find something else you can poke through there to make the hole a little wider so you can thread it more easily. It's going to be hard to get the thicker elastics if you use that all the way through in the holes if they're too small, and these are pretty decent size, really. I could put this all the way through there with no problem, so that's why I'm just kind of wiggling this a little and trying to make sure it's an adequate opening for the elastics. Again, sorry for my voice. The springtime weather gets to my eyes and my throat every year. Now, I think some of the vinyl quality of this is kind of making it where there's holes seem to close up a little bit, you know, like it kind of just flops back over the opening. But it's seeming like it's pretty good. I'm a little bit off here. But you know what? I don't mind that. And that's just the way things go when I craft. But once it's threaded through, it's going to be so minimal, it won't matter. I've seen some junk journals made recently that actually have this like threading that kind of goes around and around. And it's not perfect looking. I've thought about going back and kind of creating a similar effect here so that this doesn't look quite as noticeable. But then again, we are going to paint it. So at this step, I think is when it would be good to paint, because we want to do that before we thread it. So you can use any kind of acrylic paint. This is Anita's all-purpose acrylic. I got this at Hobby Lobby, but Walmart, Joann's, Michael's, they all have these acrylic paints. Any kind will work. I'm trying to think if I've gotten them anywhere else. Some people have said that the dollar store, Dollar Tree, has them. I haven't found it there yet, but I have heard that they do have paints available sometimes. So you just need to select a paint, and if you have anything else on hand, maybe even paint that you do on your walls, like a vinyl paint, that might work fine. I really want to use this yellow. This is golden yellow. That's one of my favorite shades of yellow. This is a pumpkin, and this is a rust red, and I'm really not sure. I'd kind of liked to do a green, but I don't think I have green. So gather your paints, get some kind of brush or applicator, and then we will go ahead and paint our covers. Be right back. Okie dokie, I'm back. I've got my paint set up. I chose the orange or the pumpkin because my ocean blue, closest thing I have to being a shade of green, it's more turquoisey. I don't have enough of that to do a cover. Let's pour it out a minute. We'll see. I think I used this for my first TN a few years ago when I made my first vinyl cover. And then I'm going to just see what we have in the way of the yellow. I kind of really want to do yellow. Maybe I can make this work. Ugh, it's pretty floppy. Kind of old, I think. So, yeah, you can see those look really neat together. And then, I should have shaken that up a bit. Here is the, let's see, rust red. So, I have a Cherry Sky, the Waypoint leather from Chic Sparrow, and I have a Roadrunner from Sojourner USA. So I don't think I want to use the rust because it's similar to those leathers. But I'm wondering, maybe I'll try the yellow here. And if it's not enough, I can go back over it with orange. So what we're going to do is just cover. You can use any kind of brush. I like to use these sponge brushes for projects like this where I'm just covering a surface. I'm not trying to be too exact. I got a big package of them somewhere. I want to say Michael's, you know, for not too much. So the idea is they're disposable, or you don't have to keep rinsing them out, but I do. I reuse them numerous times. So I'm getting into the creases here where I sewed. And I think that will disguise some of the imperfection of my sewing. And here's a stray thread from somewhere. I'm going to turn a page here of this big old catalog so I don't get paint where I don't want it. And I'm trying not to get it on my board here because I don't want paint all over it. You could, I think, paint it and then sew it. I'm not sure why that wouldn't work, but if you were putting on a pocket, that may not work. But if you want the thread to stand out more, like have it contrasting, like maybe it would look neat to have a teal thread with this. Okay, now I get my fingers dirty. My fingernails are dirty too, which is really gross. I don't like having dirty fingernails. But I was working with some other stuff earlier and just didn't get my hands all clean. Sorry about that, if you noticed. And if you didn't notice, now you have. Okay, so this looks kind of fun. I want to cover up this dark thread. I just used the thread that was already in my machine. It was black on the top and a white bobbin thread. So this is actually working well. Again, you might want to paint ahead, and then you could have the inside done more easily of your pocket if you chose to do a pocket. But, you know, there's a lot of different ways of trying this. And the main idea here is to test it out before you make the investment of a more expensive leather TN if you're headed that way. This can also just be a fun way to have a TN. And like I've said a couple times now, this is how I first made my TN, and I used it for a year and a half or more. And it was absolutely perfect. I just had trouble after a while with the hole stretching out of shape that held my closure. And so then I kind of repaired that, and it worked fine. But then at that point I decided I did like the Traveler's Notebook method, and I just decided at that point to buy one. And I had looked at a couple different kinds and found one that I thought was reasonably priced on Etsy. It was called Leather Planners Plus. I'm not sure if there's still a shop or not. I feel like I've tried to look them up and I've gotten a link to somewhere else, but don't hold me to that. If that interests you, go ahead. They seemed really reasonably priced. So there we go. We have a coat of yellow. I need to let that dry, of course, and then I have to decide if I want to do the inside. I could just leave it the cream. I'm kind of thinking at this point that I like the idea of it being more summery looking, a brighter springy or summertime color, just for variety, because I don't have leathers in the lighter colors. I usually select a more natural tone like a brown or sometimes a green or like the deep barn red. Another thing that could look really cool is if I do paint splatter on this. You put a little bit of paint on a brush and you kind of tap it like that and it'll splatter. It won't work so well on a sponge. You need to get a regular brush, and one of those fan brushes works well for that, or a toothbrush. If you have an old toothbrush, just dab it in some paint and pull the bristles back with your finger and it'll shoot everywhere. So put something around if you don't want everything covered with paint splatter. So I'm going to let this dry. This acrylic paint dries really fast. Then I'm going to flip it over and decide if I want to do the inside. And I'm just taking a peek now to make sure I've got the edges. Looks like I could maybe add. See that? If you do too much on the edge, then you're going to end up getting it on the other side, and then you're going to feel like you have to do the inside. But I'm trying to just get the top edge so that from any angle it will have this golden yellow color. And the only thick elastic I have available right now is that green I showed you a minute ago from I think it was Lucky Little Planner on Etsy, and I actually think that might look nice with this yellow. I think I might order some more of those elastics. I like the idea of kind of having other options available. I really like the Traveler's Notebook system. It's worked well for me. But I have also found that I like variety, so sometimes just mixing up the elastics or adding a charm, something like that, kind of makes it like a hobby as well as a thing that I do that's functional too. So touching up here a little bit of this thread that looks dark still. So I don't want that much of a contrast with the black stitching and the yellow. That could look cool, be like a bumblebee. But in this case, I want to just kind of have it blended. No reason, just personal preference. Okay, I will leave this. We'll come back in a little bit when it's dry, maybe in about an hour, and test it. And then from there, we will decide whether or not to paint it. So if you're at home doing this, let it dry and decide if you want to paint the inside cover and do that. And then our next step will be to thread the elastics through, and I will show you how to do that when we come back. Thanks. See you in a bit.